Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's performance will include ancient ayahuasca, cheese curds on fries, and a subject that Father Gabriel actually likes? All this and more on an angelic episode of Created Things.
Welcome to Created Things, the only podcast that shows you the lovable side of having too many wings and thousands of eyes. I'm your host, Dominican priest and increasingly legitimate medievalist, Father Gabriel Teretta, and with me is, as my ever-lovable co-host, Jacob Flores Popchek, artist and psychotherapist. How are you today?
And I'm well, and I would say decreasingly legitimate medieval scholar by the day.
Oh, that's great. You know, sometimes I feel like medievalism is like a plague, you know, like it just like once it comes upon you, it just grows and grows. So I'm glad to hear that it's possible to shuck it as you grow as well.
What's that philosophical notion? It's not Occam's razor, it's the other one where the something effect, where you sort of, when you don't know a lot about a thing, you get to a certain apex where you think you know a lot about it, and then it all goes downhill from there, where you're like, oh, I know nothing about this. That's me with medievalism in regards to you. Like at the start of this podcast, I was like, I know a lot more than everyone else I know knows. And I'm like, that's still true, but I know nothing.
It's incredible. I do not indulge in it for various reasons, but there is a whole like medievalists on Twitter. This is like a whole thing. Like there's a whole universe of like medievalists on Twitter who are both like people writing PhDs like me, and then people like who already have PhDs, like my friends and things. And it's you know, if you just thought like, wow, I wonder if I took something that was already weird and put it into like an insane exponential weird machine, which is called Twitter, like what would come out? Guess what? It's pretty weird.
Yeah.
So
guess what? Human beings, when left to their own devices, can always make something a little weirder and a little more toxic.
Yeah, possibly. How did you know? You are a genius. I know you're a psychotherapist. I didn't realize you were also psycho-ick. It's amazing.
I always say that to my clients. I'm like, when I'm about to pose something that I basically am sure is 100% true about their psychology, but I want to be humble, I'll say something along the lines of, so look, I want to throw something out there, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong. I'm allowed to be wrong. I'm a psychotherapist, not a psychic. But here's the thing I think. And it's always like, yes, this is 100% true about you. But, you know, we must at least feign humility in these things.
That's amazing. I know every now and then it happens when you know, someone comes for priestly counseling or whatever, which is obviously, you know, same as for you. Well, mutatis mutandis. There's some similarities, you know, like
Hakuna Matata.
Hakuna Matata. I say, oh crap! I just dropped a random Latin phrase. Sorry. Anyway, you know, so it's an intimate moment, and people, you know, they're concerned with the particular troubles that they're experiencing, which is perfectly reasonable, you know. And so, but sometimes you'll say, you know, just like, do you think maybe, you know, like X, Y, or Z might be going on? And sometimes people will look at you. I mean, I'm talking outside the sacrament here, you know, but like people will look at you like you're Padre Pio, you know, like you read souls, and it's just like, I don't read souls. I do, however, read a lot of novels.
I don't even remember who now, but someone did ask me once what the difference was between biblical, like the sin of being a psychic, and then versus the like mystical gift of prophecy, and was like trying to understand that. And I can't remember really what else I said. I said more than this, but I remember saying like, I really feel like most of the cases that I can think of when it comes down to biblical prophecy is like just basic level insight. Like, hey, king, if you keep sleeping with people, folks are going to get mad and your kingdom is going to get destroyed. Like, that's not so much prophecy. And like, I saw a vision. It is just like common sense and insight being delivered to someone who has neither of those things.
Which turned out to be neither that common nor much of ordinary sight. In fact, as it turns out, you know, I just, for any listener who might have a passion for pre-World War II German novels, so there's this German novelist from like the 1930s named Franz Werfel. He wrote the Song of Bernadette, the book that movie turns out to be based on a book. And he was a super, super famous, really celebrated sort of literature in Germany. Really widely written lots of books, and was just, everyone sort of loved him. He wrote this book called Jeremias höre die Stimme, which, as everyone knows, means Jeremiah, hearken unto the voice. It's been translated into English. I think it's called something like Hearken unto the Voice. Anyway, it's this incredibly beautiful novel about, like, what is it actually like? What would it actually be like to just hear the word of God in this sense, like to be a prophet in the way in which Jeremiah is a prophet, which is like getting these strange messages. He's seeing these visions, occasionally having words, and then like having words to give to people, but then also having these actions, these kind of prophetic actions to do. Just this incredibly beautiful and really thoroughly conceived like human and divine understanding about like what this means for the human person, and it's amazing. Werfel incidentally has he has an additionally interesting history, because like he was Germany's most popular like highbrow literary author, or one of the most popular in the 30s. He's a Jewish guy. And so this created some problems, but like he was just amazing. He was just an amazing person, and like, and then like, go figure, like this is the like the Nazis had to oust one of their most famous favored and famous literary figures, because whatever. So anyway, he's incredible.
Man, I would love to go down that rabbit hole, because I just last night watched like a mini YouTube documentary on the channel Today I Found Out, which is my favorite channel, both because it's so interesting and also because the host of that channel is literally like, is just your British twin, like looks exactly like you.
That's
but British.
Amazing.
In every way. And they do like random pieces of history. And I watched a mini documentary they did on how Goering, Hitler's right-hand man, like the one who was supposed to take over the Nazi party upon Hitler's death, his brother was like a major leader in the Jewish resistance.
Oh my gosh. Oh my
and
gosh.
They hated each other. There was like
weird.
Literally,
why would they?
Yeah, like a dualistic god, but the brother who led the Jewish, or who was a leader in the Jewish resistance and like literally saved hundreds of lives, but specifically we know the names of 34 people that he saved, and there's a really good book on it called 34. He would continually like get arrested and then basically blackmail his way out of prison by saying, I'm the brother of the leader of the Nazi party. You have to let me go. And they would always let him go, to the degree that he could, like, at one instance, pulled up to a concentration camp with a truck and said, I need workers for my factory. And they couldn't even ask to see the normal paperwork that they would normally need to see, because they're like, oh shit, this guy's the Nazi dude's brother. And so he like literally took these Jews out into the woods and like handed them maps and was like, get out, like just go that way, get out. And it was so fascinating to hear like the juxtaposition of these two guys' lives from childhood and everything else. But unfortunately we'll have to save the bulk of our Nazi adjacent content for another episode.
Yeah, that's anybody who just floated into this podcast, by the way, is gonna love to hear that phrase. We're gonna have to save the rest of our Nazi adjacent content for another time.
Sure. Yeah, that's not gonna get me canceled.
No,
we are anti-Nazi. We are pro-history nerd.
For the
podcast.
record.
Yeah, for the record. But I am glad to cut back. I'm glad you brought up this idea of kind of prophetic vision, because I think organically sort of pivots us into the topic of today. We're talking about angels today, angels in art, specifically angels in art and architecture and the history of that. But it's no secret that most of what we sort of determine to be the look of angels comes from this prophetic vision of I believe it was the prophet Ezekiel, right? That has this like crazy ayahuasca drug trip and is like, I see things with thousands of eyes and my hands look like chickens. And, and so it's, I think it's a nice pivot point into angels and the weirdness and surrealness and mysticalness of how those are depicted in art. Why did you, let's start here. You have been looking forward to this topic. You suggested this topic. You've been champing at the bit to do this topic. I have been outwardly dreading this topic, and we haven't talked about why for either of those things. So I'm going to ask you, why now? Why was this a topic that you were so excited to do today?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of reasons. One is because the angels are the best. So this is one thing for Dominicans in general, but like people who spend a lot of their time reading St. Thomas Aquinas, are gonna kind of like ineluctably, like you can't avoid it, are going to become totally obsessed with angels at some point, because Thomas is kind of obsessed with angels, and they're amazing, it turns out. So like theologically speaking, the role the angels play in like our life with God, and like how they like who they are in creation, all that kind of stuff, is like theologically it's so amazing, and it's just like infinitely worth looking at and infinitely worth thinking about. So there's that, like there's just this antecedent excitement about angels because they're amazing. But then there's also so these last few years I've been spending a lot of time with like kind of medieval art, and like especially kind of Carolingian art in the Western world, and then like Byzantine art, and then some early Christian stuff. And like the more you dive into this stuff, the more you realize that like angels are just absolutely everywhere, and they're doing all kinds of different things, and they are fascinating and stunningly portrayed, and they are answering all of these questions, and they are posing all of these questions. Like they become like a whole artistic language of their own. And I just thought like this is a thing of like a real splendor, that there's real visual splendor here, and like artistic storytelling power, and it's a way of like looking at reality and thinking about who the human person is, and thinking about who God is and how those are related. That is just something really, really like a treasure, I think, for artists. And it has always been a treasure for artists. And so I just thought like, I mean, behold, we have a podcast where we talk about like treasures for artists, and I just thought this is like too cool to pass up,
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't disagree with you. I mean, it's definitely something I feel like we should talk about. I hate to say it, I'm about as cynical as a person can be, as a religious person can be anyway, about the subject of angels, in part because there's just so much I don't know. And I own that. But I think to make me feel safe, I just need you to sort of have like heretical button ready to go. Like if I say
Ding,
something
ding, ding,
that's
ding,
just bad, just interrupt me, because I don't want to say anything bad, but I don't know what I'm talking about.
Fair.
So I will start off by saying, I mean, I have many things that raise my hackles with the subject, but the one of the biggest things is, I think, directly relevant to why you want to talk about it, which is that I feel like angels historically have been so predominantly an artistic motif that has less to do with angels themselves and more to do with the artist trying to represent something about God, that I don't personally really know where interesting art tradition ends and what I'm actually supposed to believe begins.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting subject for artists to talk about too, when like something has been so proliferated in the arts that it's almost its own thing now and has very little to do with what the actual thing it's based on was. I mean, a funny example is when you look at like how medievalists drew animals they'd never seen, and the elephant looks like a weird Muppet, and the crocodile has 1,000 tails and stuff like this, because they're just sort of writing by second, third, fourth hand information, or drawing from second hand information, and this is that on like a grand scale where everybody's sort of contributed to this common collective schema of what angels are. And I don't really know what the difference is between what angels are in art and what angels are in theology. I have my suspicions, but I think that smudgedness of the line immediately makes me uncomfortable.
Right. And I would say let's go farther back than that, at least briefly, because I think the reason that you have that discomfort, just to speculate, is because, in fact, angels are no more prevalent in art, and in fact probably underrepresented in art, than they were present in the lives of Christians before the modern day. Like, so it's not, it's actually quite the opposite of what you're proposing. It's not just that
Mhm.
like, well, we don't really know what these are, but like they make like just these trippy, like incredible like visual splendor, and so like we're gonna kind of like dig into the visual splendor, but like who knows what it really means. It's quite the opposite, actually, is that people are becoming, I mean, people from the very beginning are profoundly interested in angels, and then that just like ramps up and up and up and up, and like people are thinking about angels all the time. They have a huge role in like the spiritual world. They have a huge role in how people think about the Christian life and all of these things. And I'm talking like uh, I mean, they're always a theme, but like they become a major theme from maybe say like 500 until and that just expands and grows and grows and grows until maybe like say 1968, I would say, roughly about. There are
And then they all
shifts.
become and then they all become cute little statues for your grandma to own.
Exactly. And there are things that happen there. So basically, I think part of, I'm really glad actually that you, in this sense, I'm glad that you have that sort of thought and reservation to be able to bring it forward, because in fact, I think that's it, is that we have currently such a shrunken and small view of what angels are, both in art and in like reality, that they kind of seem weird, like either just some sort of weird imagination, or just some kind of artistic trope, you know?
Sure.
Like,
Well, maybe it would be okay if you don't mind. And if I mean, if you have an idea of where you want to take this thing, I am totally fine, like negating what I'm about to propose. But maybe it'd be good to sort of present a brief, for me to present like a brief thought on like my understanding of angels as they pertain to art. And I'm going to try to relegate it mostly to that. And then you can use that as a springboard for bringing in your obviously much deeper and more nuanced and more educated thoughts. Would that be a cool way to kind of go about this, do
yeah,
you think?
let's do it. But first, yes, I want that. But first, I just want to ask you, like, I think we should just lay on the table, like, when I say like angels, represent visual representations of angels, um, from your own experience, like especially what you saw as a child or as a young person or whatever, like what are the things that, could you just propose like a couple of things that come to mind?
Well, that's sort of, yeah, actually, I mean, that perfectly pivots me into it, because that's sort of what I wanted to do
Oh,
here.
great,
I
great, great,
mean,
great.
my, you know, in my mind, there are different historical periods of angels, and I was exposed to each of them early
Cool.
to different effects. I have this idea that in pre-Christianity, especially in very ancient Judaism, angels were these eldritch abominations that are essentially the cousins of the Egyptian Sphinx and the Persian Griffin, and I mean artistically, they're
Yeah,
cousins of
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And my assessment, my first thought, I think, probably seeing these depictions were like, wow, that's pretty crazy, as is everyone's. And then I think I inferred that the point of these monsters, and they are monsters, was less to describe the angels themselves, but more to say something about God. Namely that, in the book of Job, we hear God described as making of the Leviathan, which is not a thing in Judeo-Christian thought at all, but was borrowed exclusively from Babylonian texts. But the Leviathan in Babylonian Mesopotamian texts is the terrifying dragon that brought chaos into the world. It's the dragon of chaos, right? And in the book of Job, that idea is adopted, and it's basically saying, that creature, which is the worst thing that you can imagine, that's like a pet to God. That's how big and badass God is. This is like his little wiener dog.
There's this
right?
incredible line in is it Psalm 130? I always forget which psalm it is. There's an incredible line in one of the psalms where it talks about the monsters God made to play with, and it's just every time it comes up, I'm just picturing like God, and then there are these like scary monsters, but they're also kind of like squishy toy dolls, and he's just like, wee.
Yeah, Godzilla to us is a goldfish to him, or et
Yeah,
cetera. And that's
exactly.
like,
So you got
and
like Cthulhu, you've got Leviathan,
right,
yeah,
and that's what I mean
exactly.
when I say Eldritch abomination, right?
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
a very Cthulhu vibe to these creatures, you know. And so my thought was that artistically, these depictions of angels had way less to do with what anyone actually thought an angel was, and a lot more to do with almost a propagandist kind of, but a sincere one, intention to depict how much more monstrous in a good way God was by comparison. This is, you know, you see this 40,000 foot intersecting ring covered in eyes and teeth, and you think that's the worst thing you can ever imagine. Guess what? That's a pet to the guy I worship. You know, my dad is bigger than your dad, kind of a thing. And that's one class of angels. And again, I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying that's what I inferred. And then there's this other sort of historical category of angels, and I'm not entirely confident where it picks up, but I suspect it's sort of late Middle Ages and early Renaissance, where we start depicting, you know, angels as like the beautiful people with wings. And for me, like artistically, I inferred that was for two reasons. One, because artists in this period were really trying to convince themselves and everybody else that they were the one true continuation of Greco-Roman thought. And we're trying to sort of invent the idea of a dark age, even though there kind of wasn't one. And so they wanted an excuse to paint sexy Greek, you know, Greco-Roman statue type bodies, and angels gave them a way to visit upon those concepts of, you know, Ares and Cupid and kind of things in a Christian baptized way. And then the other thing that I inferred was that at that time, it was less important to people to depict the comparative bigness and monstrousness and badassness of God, and it was much more important to them to convey the kingship of God in a time that was really racked by, you know, different Christian fiefdoms killing each other. You know, the importance of the King of Kings and Christ the King was super important. And so we're going to start depicting angels as humans to show, again, nothing to show, not trying to show anything about angels specifically, but just trying to show who God is by comparison. In this case, a king who is waited upon by servants and heralds, and the heralds go before him and they tell of his coming. And then we pivot into, and this is especially present with like Raphael and, you know, the Saint Madonna, when he paints those cute little baby angels. And then pretty much after that, in my mind, that's a third historical type of angel, artistic type of angel, where at that point we're painting angels as just cute little babies with wings to illustrate the kindness and the innocence of God, right? And then finally there's this fourth one, and this is the last one that I've sort of observed, which is sort of the 90s postmodern depiction of angels, although it is not in the 90s. I think it probably starts with Milton's Paradise Lost. But this idea of angels as narrative device to study our own complex relationship with fatherhood. And so God is the asshole dad, and angels are the layabout teenagers who just need to be slapped. And that's everything from Paradise Lost to Neil Gaiman's Lucifer, to Dogma, the movie Dogma with Alan Rickman, to all, you know, all these sorts of things are that. So in my mind, there are these four types of angels, and none of them have anything to do with what angels are. They exclusively have only to do with what we were trying to say about God based on who he hung out with. And that gives me pause, because I go, the only thing I know about angels is what someone was trying to say about their friend in art, and was caricaturizing as a result. And what the hell is an angel when you actually separate it out from what is essentially sincere propaganda, because it's just someone trying to teach me a lesson through the way they depict something.
Right.
So that's my
That's great. And the best part about that is almost everything about it's wrong, which is fantastic.
Okay.
Which is good. Like, I'm glad, you know, like, that's good. Like, these are good. These are your experiences. Like, and, you know, just to come out and say, like, I mean, when I think of this, like, how would I answer this question? Like, when I think back my own experience about angels and like why I have discomfort about artistic representations of them, it's not any kind of high-minded. I mean, there have been high-minded objections to depicting angels and stuff in both Jewish and Christian past, you know. But for me, it's not. It's just because, like, if I scan my entire life until, like, I don't even know, like my mid-20s, and I think about any representation of angels, what I'm thinking about is like Precious Moments dolls. What I'm thinking
Mm-hmm.
about is like, a friend of mine in high school, his mom was not a Christian. Nobody in the family was. Um, and her house was covered, like every flat surface, with like these little Precious Moments dolls of these like,
Ugh.
kind of porcelain, sort of drippy pastelly.
Mm-hmm.
This is like bad kitsch, like,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever we want to call it. Like, this is like bad kitsch. So there's that. And then there's the kind of like sentimental Christian, sort of like angels are watching over me. Like I grew up, when, like, what was that TV show with
Touched by
angels?
an Angel.
Touched by an Angel was this big thing
With
where it was kind of like
Roma
spiritual.
Roma Downey did that, and then she ended up doing the like Bible and Jesus Christ miniseries for History Channel some
Oh,
years
cool.
later.
Yeah. So it was like kind of Christian, kind of spiritual, kind of like post-Christian 90s, like, all this
Yeah, because
stuff.
she's a pretty fierce Catholic from Ireland.
Oh, I
And
didn't
then I
know that.
think,
Oh,
yeah,
that's
no,
great. Yeah.
she's pretty fiercely, like, they did a whole episode where the angels like try to solve like the angels like try to solve the conflict between Catholic and Protestant people in Ireland.
No, they
and
don't.
It's like,
No, they did
it's
not.
terrible.
No, they
It's
did
bad.
not.
But yeah, no, she's a good woman. I mean,
That's
she's a kind
awesome.
person.
Yeah,
but
no, it's all
very
great.
90s.
Yeah. It's just this whole funny kind of concept. And then like, and then like once I became Catholic and started to see, then there's all this kind of like drippy Catholic stuff of sort of, there's this really dreadful kind of like late 19th century, early 20th century, like, um, lithograph type paintings of this like apple-cheeked lady wearing a big white dress and some like weird, dove wings behind her, who's like hovering awkwardly, like call the cops, over these two like apple-cheeked little munchkins who are about to fall off a bridge. And that's like your like guardian angel holy card for your guardian angel prayer.
Hmm.
And things like this, which I was just like, what is this? Like, and so my thought, like in my own experience, my initial resistance to angels and their artistic depiction, is because, and I think there might be some of this in the background of what you're saying too, or I think you said this fairly openly, like, is that, it's just real discomfort with the idea of angels. Is like, are they just a kind of sentimental,
Yeah, are they an
um,
artistic construct? I mean, you talked about last episode about your sort of fear of romanticism because it feels like a lie. And in the same way, I don't think I fear romanticism to quite the same way you do, but I am very wary of any time I feel like I'm being lied to. And when there's a
absolutely.
certain degree of like artistic agenda in the thing, what you want me to believe about this, I immediately start to get cynical and I go, okay, what parts do I need to, what's the gristle that I need to cut off here? And
Right.
what's the meat? And I've never been clear. And I'll give you a sentimental thing because you open with a personal experience. I was sort of staying in the high-minded academic, but I'll give you a personal experience. So I was very young and some religion teacher was like, you all need to, like, I'm sure it was like for first communion prep or something, was like, you all need to get to know your guardian angel. So everyone like go home and name your guardian angel and like get to know your guardian angel. So I named my guardian angel Ouchie because I assumed he was always saving me from getting hurt because I was
Fair.
dumb and klutzy. And then like not 3 or 4 years later, some rad trad screamed at me that you should never name your guardian angel
How
or
dare
should talk to
you?
them at all because that was technically the sin of divination. And at that point, I sort of threw my hands up and I was like, I have no dog in this fight. One side of this is sentimental childhood nonsense. One side of this is crazy pants, just hate. And I don't get anything out of it either way. I have
Right.
a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, even if there are, and I don't mean to sound overly Protestant, but my thought at the time was like, even if there are these celestial beings who carry around his abstract throne, I have a personal relationship with him. I receive him in the Eucharist. I don't give a shit about his servants at that point. I don't need to get involved in this weird argument that you people are having over my head. I'm done. And that was sort of my like last experience
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah,
Angel.
yeah,
I was
yeah.
just like, I'm out. I don't need to be part of this
Enough.
at all.
Yeah, fair. So just real quick, like this is an arts podcast, and it is going to remain so. Just a really quick take, like, at but necessary to understand as a background for like everything that is happening in Christian representations of angels is that um, angels are like central to how people understand and read the scriptures and like think about the human relationship to the divine that's made known in them. So so angels are all over the Bible. They're from the book of Genesis to the book of Revelation. That's the first and the last book, as it's given to us, as we lay it out. Sometimes they are very confusingly expressed in the scriptures, like seemingly contradictory at times. Like three angels come to meet Abraham one time at the Oak of Mamre, but like it keeps switching whether between there being three, a plural form of address and then a singular form of address and then a plural form, and then there seems to be one, but then there seems to be three, and he keeps calling them my lord, and sometimes they're clearly like messengers, but sometimes he's talking to them directly like as if they were God. And so it's very interesting the way that they appear. For instance, in like the book of Genesis, they tend to be as far as we can tell, they have a human form, so like the two of the angels go to visit Sodom on Sodom's last day on the earth, and like a bunch of people from like the Sodomites come and they want to become very close friends with these two, who they just think are two beautiful young men. And so like so there's that, like that's one depiction of these. Abraham is bowing down before them because he recognizes like the presence of God in them, but like there's like this group of people in this town just think that they're going to be like a real fun night on the town whether they want to or not. So there's that. So there's something about like how are they seen, how are they expressed, how are they felt, but they appear not to look any different than a human being per se. Jacob wrestles with an angel, and again, like we're not given any indication that this angel looks different than a normal person per se. But elsewhere you see like, the very beginning you see like Saint Michael or an angel with a sword, a flaming sword, guarding the Garden of Eden, and all these things. Anyway, we don't want to go into all of it, but then there are other places where angels are described in this like very sort of wild way. So, the ones that you're talking about, you're thinking about the kind of like crazy sort of like spheres and circles and wings and whatever else. There are these three basic passages in the book of Isaiah, the book of Ezekiel, and then the book of Revelation. And this Christian artists will kind of mix and match these when they're doing a certain thing. So just real quick, it's Isaiah 6:2, which says, "Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew." So that's going to be 2 up top, 2 down below, and then 2 sitting out the side. There's something similar in Ezekiel. Says, the likeness of 4 living creatures, each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings, and under their wings on their 4 sides they had human hands, and it goes on to explain. And in Revelation, this is amped up in a way that sounds like even wilder, which is around the throne, on each side of the throne are 4 living creatures. Yeah, so clear, direct reference to Ezekiel. 4 living creatures full of eyes in front and behind. Christian art is going to go wild with this as it goes along. Okay, so we have them represented all over. There is exactly one passage in the Bible where we see an angel described as flying. Exactly one. It's in the book of Revelation, and it says like, "Then I saw another angel flying in mid-heaven." Okay. So we have just from the scriptures alone, we have all these different senses of what they are. We know that they're messengers. That's what the word means. They're messengers from God, but they also seem to manifest his presence. The Christian thinking about angels is always a major part of Christian thinking. Just for instance, like Tertullian, this really wild Christian thinker from the end of the 2nd century, he's writing an explanation about angels to the emperor, actually, trying to say like, hey, here's the stuff that we believe, like, don't kill us. It's a new emperor, and he's saying like, there's no reason you should kill us, like we're cool. And he's explaining that like every angel has wings, and there's good angels we call like angels, and then there's bad angels that we call demons, and like all this kind of stuff. Okay, fine. So like it's a big thing from the beginning. uh, around 500, this guy who writes under the name of Dionysius writes this really important book called the Celestial Hierarchy, where he ranks out 9 choirs of angels, so 9 ranks of angels that the names of which all come from the scriptures, which are like angels and archangels, right? It's the lowest kind. So it goes up this rank of like closeness to God, and it goes up to like seraphim and cherubim and thrones. The closest, he says. And he has this whole elaborate understanding of the way in which the angels, God intentionally chooses to use angels as intermediaries to manifest himself and his graces and knowledge of him to human beings, not because he needs to, not exactly as you say, because like if he didn't, then like how could I possibly how could human beings possibly have a living relationship with me? But this is like in the divine goodness that he wants. Even knowledge about him is never a knowledge of facts. It's always a knowledge of persons. And so even persons transmit the knowledge of persons. So like angels pour forth knowledge and love of God down this kind of like hierarchy to one another, and then they pour it down onto us. And they have these various functions and various things that they do. And this becomes a really Dionysius doesn't make it up, but it becomes this very, very, very important way of conceptualizing angels that basically like goes on pretty much forever. And so we think so like this. I could go on forever, and I will just stop myself there for the theoretical presentation of what angels are as this kind of like chain of descending and outpouring knowledge and love. Think of it like that. Like one of tying it now artistically, like one of my favorite sort of visual representations of this is there's this beautiful, beautiful Cistercian monastery outside of Vienna called Heiligenkreuz. It's the oldest continuously operating Cistercian monastery in the world. It's from the end of the 12th century, which is kind of amazing. And just one part of the church is like original, really original. And it has this, on one of the walls where the sun will come in, there's all of these. It's a big kind of like Gothic, sort of like early Gothic church. Gothic starts around 1130. This church is built around 1190. So it's kind of like, it's really trying this Gothic thing of like all of this light and like space. A lot of which actually is trying to convey the intercession of the angels, the way that all of this is filled with the angels and resting on the angels and these things. And you look in the windows, there's this beautiful banks of stained glass windows that are what you'd call aniconic, so they're not representing anything visually. There's not recognizable shapes or figures or whatever. But they are these cascading patterns of light. Down and repeating, and they go down and down and down and down and down and down and down. And I was there on retreat one time, and I was just looking at these windows, and I was praying, and I was thinking like, this is it. This is the angels. This is it. It's like this, Philip Larkin's, this is sun comprehending glass pouring out the divine presence, like down and down and down and down and down and down until it can get to me. That like what we're looking at in this, it looks just like a repeating pattern of visual decoration, which it is at one level, but at another level, it is also a visual representation of like the intercession of the angels, and so it is actually an aniconic representation of angels. Which I thought was just like a spiritual insight. And I thought, well, maybe that's not what the artist intended or whatever. But it turns out, actually, it probably was what the artist intended, because there's actually a treatise written about this from around the same time period, actually. So it probably is, in fact, what the artist had in mind. So let me just that's a big sort of monologue, and I'm sorry for that. But like, this is kind of going around in the background. Anytime that you see Christian representations of angels is going to be like this whole big complex of things. So yeah. And
so let me just express the discomfort that's coming up, because this is the central discomfort. Twofold. And again, I'm at war with myself because I want this to be a primarily artistic conversation too, but there's no way to talk about this and not get into the theology. And so I'm walking this weird line. But two discomforts. One, the question I always have with any of these things is like, but how do we know? Right? You know, what I love about being a Catholic is, generally speaking, because of apostolic succession, you know, you can sort of trace any priest you know back to Jesus, and Jesus said this crap. And so we go, okay, Jesus said this, 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 and this. Awesome. And, you know, Jesus also gave us, through his sort of witness, metrics for understanding the scriptures. Great. Awesome. But no one alive has seen this hierarchy of angels, right? No, that I know of. No one, no, like, and all the sort of Milton style folklore about like, this is why Satan rebelled. And then this specific angel said this thing.
Right.
And there's this type of angel that it all feels like Irish folklore when we're defining different types of fairy. You know, there's the leprechauns and the chloricons and the, you know, this and the that and the banshee and which I love. I love folklore. Mythology has to be different than theology. There has to be a line. And I never know what the line is with angels between mythology and theology. And it makes me uncomfortable that the line is that smudged. Because again, I get worried that I'm being lied to. The other thing, though, that really bothers me on a fundamental level, and again, I don't want to sound no judgment to our Protestant brothers and sisters, but I recognize that I'm coming in with this opinion because I'm an American and all Americans, even the Catholic ones, are sort of a little bit Protestant underneath. And I can't help but feel like angels, including in the description you just gave, are sort of to God what the elves are to Santa, right? You know, he's this big old man in the sky who doesn't actually have time for me. And so, you know, he sends this messenger instead. And because I don't believe that's who God is, you know, I'll be honest, I have read the story of the three messengers coming to Abraham and observed that interchangeability back and forth between the three and the one. And I go, okay, this is the Trinity. Like these aren't angels. He's seeing them as angels because that's his framing device for this. You know, this is a folkloric people. They see magical creatures everywhere, but like he is also witnessing to the fact that like this is God, you know, and continuously whenever, you know, the angel does this, the angel of the Lord does that, I go, is it the angel of the Lord or is it just the Lord? And it always feels like the people, and this is probably judgmental of me to say, but it always feels like the people who want me to believe in angels are people who like the idea of there being more distance between them and God.
Oh yeah. Sure.
That there's a certain discomfort that they have with intimacy with God. And so they say, oh, but look at all these like fairies that are between us and God. And these are also people who tend to make, and I don't get me wrong, I fully love and believe in everything the church has to say about Mary, but there are even people within the church who like make little weird cults about Mary. I mean, in my town alone growing up, there were 2 suicide cults about Mary. So
that's exciting.
You can go too hard.
That is
with
more
Mary.
than a normal town has. I want to say
more than the national average. Yeah, and like, you know, so I am familiar with how people can say I'm sort of uncomfortable with God, whether it's because I'm uncomfortable with masculinity or whether it's discomfort with holiness and divinity or any of those things, and so I would feel a lot more comfortable if all these other little elves were between me and him, delivering his messages for me. And for those 2 reasons, the smudgedness between the theology and the mythology, and then the sort of agenda I feel like is behind it, which feels threatening to the intimacy that I want to share with God, I get very weaselly about these things.
Yeah, I think that's really great. And so just one thing to point out that's really helpful, or sort of a basis to start from, is that like Jesus Christ, as he's given to us in the Gospels, is talking about angels all the time. He is just all the time talking about angels, including like a really specific, like the most specific reference in the scriptures to there being a guardian angel. So like a specific angel who is assigned to each person to like be the one who fills them with knowledge and love and like gazes on God on their behalf. So he talks about these little ones whose angels are always have their eyes always fixed on God, right? That like each, even he's saying, even a helpless child whom you want me to ignore has an angel who is watching over him and always worshiping God. So there's this thing right there from the beginning, and that gives us such a better understanding of it, because that says right away, this can't be a distance mechanism. It can't be either
Mm.
in reality or in my concept, a distance mechanism, because Christ is proposing it, that he says, like, you think these kids are just like stupid kids and you don't want them in the way, and like maybe they're making noise and like it's annoying and you want to have like a grown-up conversation. Did you know that they are so close to God that God assigns a being of literally unimaginable, nearly infinite splendor just to guard and protect them while full-time worshiping him? That in fact, like, the way in which the angels are for us is like that image from the stained glass in Heiligenkreuz, is that it's actually this intimacy. It's drawing everything in,
Mm.
so that you have more things layered on, rather than a bunch of things pushed away that push you away. So I think the more dramatic thing that's happening, for instance, with the angelic encounters in, say, the book of Genesis, is not just that, strictly speaking, they're a kind of like literary device, mental concept for the presence of God, but that the reason that the viewer can't tell the difference, it keeps flipping back and forth and can't tell the difference about whether we're talking about God or an angel, is that they are so united with God. And the angelic being is so infinitely greater than the human, that it's like I can't tell where the one leaves off and the other begins. And that is the thing that angels do for us, is to like continue to like pour out. Remember this outpouring of knowledge and love of God, to transform the human being, to lift the human being up, to be closer to God, more intimately changed by him, more like him, more full of his knowledge, more full of his love. That like this is like the Christian goal that we're looking for, is like this union that's so intimate that like I never cease being who I am. I never replace God or like become his rival or whatever, but like that, in heaven we hope, that God willing we get there, like that I become so close to God that like if someone were to look at it from the outside, they would have a hard time telling like where does he begin and where does God leave off, or vice versa. So actually, like, thinking about the angels aright, we don't have to use some of these images, right? We don't have to use some of these images to think about angels. But if we don't have them, we tend to collapse angels to be something much more frivolous, like something that keeps God at a distance.
Right,
something
which is exactly what I'm doing. Yeah.
Exactly. And then again, like, I don't know what's the chicken and what's the egg, but think about it artistically, right? I mean, like, there's a lot to say about contemporary and like 20th century depictions of angels. So I'm not just gonna like throw the whole thing under the bus, but we don't see very many. That being said, we don't see that many kind of unironic depictions of angels. And if we do, we tend to see them in this kind of very like bad kitsch kind of like Precious Moments kind of thing. So like I would say, just for the moment, let's take it as a concept that like this is what angels could be, and see like, again, like, let's use this to ask questions, like what questions does this allow us to ask as like people trying to visually or conceptually imagine God in a living and creative way. Like what tools does this give us if we, for the moment, say like, what if I took this bigger, broader, thicker, more complicated, but also more splendid vision of angels? Like, what tools would that give me to think visually, conceptually, theologically with whatever art I'm doing,
Yeah. Okay. I like that I can adopt it as a starting prompt. I want to address the mythology versus theology thing at some point, but I think this is a good direction to take it. So, okay. So once I ask that question with that starting prompt of what can I do with this if I adopt this as true, where does that take me now?
Yeah. And then I think, so I think what's great about this is then to actually like kind of think through a little bit about like the history of Christian depictions of angels and sort of what they do and where they are, you know. So just real brief about the kind of like artistic history here is that you actually get when I said at the beginning that like, well, almost everything about that little thumbnail history you gave is wrong. I'm being a little bit glib, you know, obviously, but one thing is that like these things aren't that separated out in time. So people are depicting angels as human beings from the beginning, basically. I mean, I should say I can't immediately think of any turn of the second, third century, which is like the beginning of Christian visual art that we can recognize as such. I can't think of any clear depictions of angels from that period. But already by like the end of the beginning of the fourth century, which is when you start to see a lot more Christian art. This is already really present, you know, and they. At the beginning, they don't necessarily have wings. They will often have wings, though, and so already you think like, okay, well, what are they doing? Like, one thing that becomes really common, starting in, I don't know exactly when it starts. It's certainly already present by like the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries, both in like all over Christianity. So it doesn't matter what region you're in. Are that you depict angels actually like deacons, like deacons. I mean, so they'll have wings, but the garb that they're wearing will be like a deacon. And the reason is because deacons are servants, like that's what the word means, is service, you know. And that like the angels are the servants of God, you know. They're going and
Right,
they're
sure.
bringing his presence to people, you know. And so just for instance, like, here are some questions and some answers that like in Christian visual history people have used just this one representation of angels to think about, which is, how is God present in the mass, in the liturgy, for instance? And so you will, for instance, all over Christianity, you will have like around and somewhere around an altar, or maybe like the dome above an altar, or the dome in a church. You'll just have like a ton of angels, like maybe a bunch of different kinds of angels, like sort of stacked in hierarchies and rows and stuff, all filling the dome. And then maybe the center will be like a cross, or the Holy Spirit dove, or like a Lamb of God or something. And like and those, you know, some of those angels will be dressed like deacons, and some of them will be in other forms and stuff. And you think like, what's happening there? And you realize like they are trying to show you how radically, like, super abundantly full of personal presence, like this experience of the liturgy is, you know, that it's not just sort of like I walk into a room and then like somebody says some words that I may or may not understand, and then like I may or may not receive something onto my tongue or whatever, you know, and then like I walk away. Like, it's not that in fact like all of those things are happening, but that it is like suffused with like you are actually already really in the heavenly banquet, you know, which is the way that the scriptures have of talking about like heaven, like the final perfect union with God in heaven is like this kind of a banquet, you know, that is full of angels, that they're everywhere, and that they are in fact ministering to God and ministering to you at the same time. Again, like collapsing the distance between you and God, to like minister to him, minister to you. Like in Greek speaking parts of the church, there starts to be this big tradition actually of representing even like angels will like be bringing communion and these kinds of things, and like in which has a different which in the Western church there'll be different things as well. But so it's just to say, like, so you have this one kind of visual idea. Well, what if we had like human type angels, and like, let's think about how angels are represented in the book of Genesis, and then think about what the liturgy is, and like what's really happening in the liturgy. And suddenly like I open my eyes and I find that it is full of angels, and that the visual splendor and extravagance of the angels um, opens my eyes to what is otherwise invisible to me about the splendor of what's happening at Mass.
Okay. I've seen those things and I've witnessed them myself. I mean, as a very young kid, you're bringing back a memory that I'd really forgotten. Being a very young kid, at my parents took me. We lived near Franciscan University, and they were doing a big, Eucharistic adoration thing in their big, gigantic gymnasium, field house thing. And I remember, being so moved by the Eucharist moving around, and I was looking up at the, gigantic person-sized vents that were all above, and I was like, that's where the angels are sitting. Like they're, that's where they are to watch this. And so I mean, that's on the one hand a visceral visual for me. On the other hand, cynically, it still feels like an artistic device to represent a larger and more beautiful reality. We are believing that the Mass is, the encounter between heaven and earth, that this is truly the presence of Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity, which I fully accept and believe and love. And it seems like an argument could be made, and a little voice in my head is saying that's like, drawing all these crazy magical creatures there is just a way to further artistically evidence how cool that experience is for people. But that doesn't mean that I should necessarily assume that angels actually look like that, or that that's actually their role, or that they're actually there in that same capacity. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that I don't believe that. I'm just saying that that's the voice that comes up.
I get it. So one thing that's interesting is that a fair amount of the depiction of angels actually is pretty biblically based. So this isn't just sort of like, well, and then in like quote unquote the Middle Ages, like everything goes haywire, people start doing whatever they want. A lot of it is actually pretty biblically based, and even like for instance, like what Dionysius starts to say about like what the different angels do and stuff. Like he isn't making this up. Now he's getting a certain amount of it, a lot of it from Plotinus, the Neoplatonist. So he's definitely doing a lot with like Christian Neoplatonism, but a lot of it's just, from the scriptures. We talk about the angels, and then it's also in the liturgy, right? So like in the Eucharistic prayer, we talk about like, oh God, may your holy angel carry this sacrifice to your altar on high. So like already there's like, so like this notion that like angels are very involved here in the liturgy itself is sort of like in the words of the liturgy already. And then like some of the visuality of angels is found in an appropriately confusing form in the scriptures themselves.
Sure.
So the question, I guess, is then like, but this is always the question for visual representations of angels, because this is ultimately why any the written descriptions of them as they appear in the scriptures are often quite strange and sometimes internally contradictory, sort of in intentional ways, is because like ultimately angels don't have bodies. They're purely spiritual beings like God, and so, it's clearly, they manifest themselves sometimes, right? But that's just it's a nonce thing, like angels aren't becoming incarnate, like in Book of Genesis or whatever, it's a appearance in the form of a body,
Sure,
and all this. So you have to ask, like, so how do I represent them? How do I actually do it then? So like I basically have a couple of options. Like one is I could just say the sort of visual and theological parsimony option, which is just to say like, well, I can live without them. And so we just don't, like I may not actually need this hypothesis. And so I will just do without them. Okay, that's one option. Another option is to like, okay, so I'm going to like look and think about like what I find in the Bible and think about it really hard and see where that opens out,
Sure.
And ultimately I think the visual tradition that we have in Christianity is people doing the latter.
Which is cool with me. I mean, I understand, I'm a believer in many unseeable things. I adopt that and accept that. My problem is when we get overly literal with it, when the person says, no, 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 this is what there are these explicit classes of angel, and they do explicitly look like this. This isn't just an artistic interpretation of an ineffable reality, a genuine reality, but an ineffable, unseeable one nonetheless. No, no, no. This is absolutely what the Ophilim and the Seraphim and the Boogaboo look like. And, to say anything else is heresy. And, they all worship at this actual physical throne that they carry around that God sits in because,
thrones,
we get thrones from him.
That's cool.
And it's just baffling to me. It's like, I don't think God's sitting in a physical concrete throne somewhere. I don't.
What? Just because God doesn't have a body means he's not sitting in a throne? That's so weird. Yeah.
Well, but that's what I'm saying.
No, I get it.
I have no problem with an artist saying, hey, I believe in angels. I believe this is their purpose. I love the purpose that you're actually displaying. It makes a lot of sense to me. This idea of, just waterfalls of relationship and closeness to God and advocacy for us to God. And okay, cool. I want to explore that more, but I can vibe with it. That's fine. What I have a problem with is artistic literalism, where someone says, this isn't just my depiction of this. This is this. I mean, like, I illustrated a book 2 years ago now. I'm very proud of it. I don't know if you ever got to see it, but God the Father and the Best Day Ever through OSV. And it was this story.
Oh, no. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, really my favorite book I've illustrated. And it's the story of salvation history from the perspective of God the Father, like being so sad that we're gone and like planning this big plan. And I paint him as this big, the author was very concerned, and she was like, how are we going to paint God? And I said, whoa, I cannot paint God. I said, but I can paint what I want a kid to know about God. So I made this, great big giant God, with paintbrush in hand, covered in paint, as he was physically making his own creation, physically sculpting Adam and Eve. And his hair was, his skin was tan, his hair was purple, because I didn't want to identify him with any particular race so that any kid could read it. And so, my point in showing this was like, God is this loving, creative, dad bod guy who revels in his own creation and who defies those things that keep us separate. And I don't pretend that that's everything to say about God, but that was the particular message we wanted kids to know about God from this. That's fine. That's what artists do, is depict stuff like that. But I would freak out if someone walked away from reading my book and said, no, 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 God's hair is, God has hair and it is purple. And that's at the point, because I'm painting a mythology and iconography, and then if you make that literal, I think you lessen who God is.
Yeah.
And that's what I feel like, that's my worry with the angel thing.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to say about the dangers of like visual dogmatism, on one side, like because we have legitimate necessary pressures. Like at one side, our minds only work by like symbolic understanding, and so like if you paint something that is a pure expression of your own emotion or understanding or thoughts or whatever, but you don't use any recognizable visual symbol that communicates to another person, that's not a visual language. Like it's not a kind of it. There might be some possibility of like an intuitive understanding, but there's not going to be like a
but in design terms, it's ineffective.
It's going to be really limited
design
in what it can actually communicate, and not that the only purpose of art is communication, but like as a comment on reality or an unveiling of reality. The danger there is that all you're unveiling is yourself, actually, and you can't unveil anything further than yourself, because you can't use any mode of speaking visually to speak here that anyone else can hear, can see, and can understand, and that's a danger, right? So that's at one side, but then also there can be this like neurotic dogmatism, as if like somehow like it literally must be this way, so like I have a good friend who's a really fantastic sculptor, and he one time made this crucifix for a church, where for reasons that were important, I believe, for like where it was being placed physically in the church, he put like Saint John on the viewer's left and Mary on the viewer's right. And a bunch of people complain. You put it up, and it's there, you know. And then a bunch of people complain that because they're like, no, Mary is on the left and John is on the right, you know. And like, and yeah, it's true. Like it is often the way that they're represented. But like again, like let's not. There's a difference between like the dogma of faith in the sense of like what is the life-giving revelation of how life-giving insight into how God has made himself known. That's dogma, you know. And then there's this like unhealthy mental trap of like things that are different or scary. I want things always to be the same. They're comfortable if they're smaller. That says like things just have to be this way and that is just how it is, you know. And that's what you could call like dogmatism. And I think it's very like, I really want to keep talking about funny, fascinating, beautiful, and strange things that we find in Christian art, because I think the only way actually that we can avoid those two extremes of either like totally private language revelation of only myself on
Artistic
one hand,
masturbation, in other
artistic,
words.
yeah, exactly, artistic masturbation, which you don't have to look too far to find, you know, obviously, or really unhelpful visual dogmatism. The only way that we can avoid those things is if we actually like do deep dives into like the complexity and the wonder of the like the reality that people are trying to depict, and then the history of different gambits they've made to try to depict it. And like, because people don't just invent things out of whole cloth every time, we will recognize helpful patterns. And again, like if we don't overly dogmatize it, then we can ask ourselves, what questions did this allow them to answer? What answers did this kind of thing give them? You know, so like why, that's why I was saying like, you know, depicting angels as deacons, that's not in the scriptures, you know, but that becomes a visual way of manifesting something that we know is true theologically about the angel's presence in the liturgy and all of this, that becomes a visual pattern of asking and answering questions about angelic presence and communion.
Which I am super down with. And if that's what I can do, if I can acknowledge that angels are real for the relational reasons that you describe, and that everything else is an artist trying to represent that ineffable reality with their specifically with what they're trying to represent about God, I am totally fine with that. But then that gets us back to my little supposedly completely incorrect artistic history, where I was trying to say that like it seems to me that what the early, you know, Jewish prophets, Ezekiel and things like this, were trying to illustrate about God through the way they depicted these angels was his comparative monstrousness, right? And his bigness and his fierceness and all these sorts of things. And that's why they have 1,000 eyes. And I mean, so let's start off with that one. I mean, do you disagree with me, number one, that was the reason they're being depicted that way? And number two, do you deny what I think is a pretty clear artistic parallel between the way angels are being depicted at that time and the way other mythological pseudo-divine beings like sphinxes and griffins are being depicted in sister civilizations in the same period?
Well, there's certainly, so again, like angels are, it's funny because like the modern mentality just thinks angels are like crazy. Like you have to be some kind of like just like dumb to think that like angels are real, you know. But like everyone thinks angels are real, you know, like in the say like the 2nd century. So like yeah, so when I was talking about like Tertullian talking to Septimus Severus, the emperor, in like 197, exactly, he's not trying to tell him like, yeah, well, so there's these things that we think they exist, they're angels. He's like, no, I mean angels, right? Like angels. And you know, the emperor's like, yeah, bro, yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm with you, you know, cool. So like everyone's, you know, whatever. So like, so there's definitely a lot of drawing and intermingling that you see happening culturally, about certain things that inform these concepts, which is nothing to be afraid of for Christian. That's totally normal.
Right.
So, but I think there is a lot more going on than that in like these sort of grand, wild, totally mysterious and weird verbal depictions that we have in like Isaiah and Ezekiel. Um, because it's not just that they're monsters or monstrous or sort of wonders or marvels. Um, it's so like, I mean, certainly where you can see like there's an informing of a certain conceptual and visual language here, that is also not being made up out of whole cloth, right? That you can point to, and you
Yeah.
should rightly look to like ancient Near Eastern religious visual and conceptual symbols for thinking about angels, the presence of God, and the gods, etc. Like totally normal. We should expect that. Like absolutely. So up to a certain point, like totally yes. Um, but these angels are doing a lot more than that. So like your example, like with Leviathan, like so Leviathan, these monsters, like the monsters he made to play with, right? Like that's really clear. He makes monsters to play with, like la, 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 you know. These angels are different. These angels are revelatory. They are some. They reveal God. So they are not just there to like distract from the glory of God, but specifically to reveal it. So all of this kind of like with the wings, and the hands and the faces and the eyes and all of this, these unveil, the dramatically unveil aspects of like who God is and who those who are closest to him are. Because that is one thing that's important to remember about like what, when Christian tradition, as we read the Bible, like we don't just think that angels are like symbols of the presence of God, that they are actually individual persons, like a
Right.
human being is a person, you know. I mean, infinitely more than I can imagine, but still, like an actual person, an individual being, of a rational nature, to give the whole definition of a person. That they are individual beings, that have a being that is proper to themselves, that has been given to them by God. Um, but like, what does an angel do? Like, literally, all an angel does is make God known in various ways. Like the angels unveil God in different ways, and sometimes the unveiling of God is just like the praising of Him in heaven, you know. But I like that's a lot of what. So this isn't just kind of like, and I'm not saying you were saying this, but like it's not just visual weirdness. It's not just kind of like visual depictions of otherness. It's also like manifestation of presence, and like all of these details, all of these things. The more that you think about them, the more that they unveil. You know, so like I mean, okay, right. H.P. Lovecraft makes up Cthulhu in like the early 20th century, but like, you know, if you think about Cthulhu, like his like tentacles, like it's just all those are just details to be like, oh, scary, like, you know.
Right.
That's not what's going on with these depictions in like Isaiah and Ezekiel specifically, and then later in Revelation. They are presented in this certain very strange, visual, conceptual way that both makes sense and doesn't make sense, to force you to keep going back to it, to force you to keep thinking about it, to force you to keep allowing that, to be like a divining rod, right? That like shows you where the water is, you know, that makes you go deeper until like to unveil to you like the living spring of where God is, right? I think that's a big part of what's going on here.
So what I hear you saying, and maybe this is too simplistic, but yes, I'm correct that there are obviously intercultural influences with the art. Yes, I'm correct that they're being depicted in the way they're being depicted to reveal something that the viewer wants you to know about God, what the artist or the narrator wants you to know about God. So yes, I'm correct on those two things. But the specific way they're depicted, you're saying, isn't just like other eldritch abominations an excuse to pile weird characteristic on top of weird characteristic for the sake of weird characteristic, but rather there's an invitational component there where I'm depicting this as something that you want to explore more in the hopes that it will bring you closer to the person who creatively invented that thing, i.e. God.
Yeah.
Is that
And
a fair summary?
Yes, thank you. I think that's really great. And also to like the marvelous person who this like I don't understand kind of like angelic being is, you know?
Right, because I think you're right. You're picking out something that I didn't explicitly enunciate. And when you said I was wrong about my history, I'm like, how am I
How
wrong?
dare
Like
you?
the
Yeah,
two
right.
things that I said, one, that they're trying to show, who God is in comparison to these things, and two, that there's artistic inter exchanging between cultures, like, are evidently true. So what the hell? But I think what you're picking up on that I didn't even explicitly identify myself is that with a Cthulhu, there is a scaring away tactic, and with angels, there's an invitational tactic where it's not, look how scary the angel is and imagine how much bigger my dad is by comparison if he was the one who made this angel and hangs out with it. But it's rather, look how big and scary this angel is. Come explore it because it's safe to do so because of the relationship you have with God. And you can learn something about him by exploring his creativity manifest and how freaking weird this thing looks.
Yeah, yeah. So like
So
for
it's
instance,
invitational rather than like pushing away emotion.
yeah, yes, exactly. And that like remember, like everything about God, God is so personal that everything about God comes to persons through persons, right? And it's like these glory of that God won't just give you a book full of facts. Even the scriptures come to us like handed down from persons to persons to persons, right?
Right.
That even like the most intimate pouring down of knowledge of love about himself comes through persons, like these angels, not through impersonal forces, through these persons who are these angels, and that's why, for instance, like one of my best friends is currently building an adoration chapel, like a perpetual adoration chapel. He a priest, obviously. And so there's going to be perpetual adoration chapel means so right so that we have a monstrance with a consecrated host in it that is exposed so that people can pray like 24 hours a day, right? And so there has to be some kind of physical barrier because if it's open, even if you have security, there's some stuff like this. And so he wants to have angels on the physical barrier, it's like a rood screen. I mean, don't think I'm not thinking plexiglass here. So this again, we're thinking the language of Christian tradition, right? You have like a rood screen between the worshippers and then the
you
holy
at various
holy.
times.
It's
Shouts out
so
swear
rude.
words.
It's so rude. Yeah, exactly. This is that's right. It's the like if you're a really bad speller, rude, ROOD, rude.
Right, yeah.
And so on either side of the door, that's the visual opening to see the Eucharist will be angels, and we talked a lot about like what kind of angels he wants, because we just said that we both were like, we don't want like cute, fuzzy, intimate, comfortable angels. Like we want angels that communicate that like these are like eternal watchers at the divine presence, who eternally unveil the infinite splendor of God's being to you. Like I do actually want, just in this sense, like let me just like meet you halfway in a certain sense, because in just a certain sense with these angels, particularly coming from the visual tradition of like Isaiah and Revelation and Ezekiel, is that you do want a little bit of not distancing, but like you want to be caught off balance. You want to be set away from what is familiar and comfortable and discover like that there is something here that is infinitely more than I was expecting. And like
That's
that,
cool.
that again, like questions and answers, right? Like those are questions, answers that I think like one of these weird sort of non-human depictions of angels, like all these wings, all these eyes, things that can even seem sort of strange. That gives you a freedom and tools that other things don't give you, I do want to talk really briefly though, about you brought up, and this is you brought up 100% accurate depiction, and so I was totally unfair when I said that everything you said was untrue about
As
chubby.
usual.
As always, Dad, why do you always do this?
I'm going to finally get to take you to a theme park. You're going to be like, this all was crap. And then like 3 weeks later, I'm like, actually, it wasn't all crap. There were these actually pretty cool insights that I had going on.
Actually, I loved it. I mean, I just loved the whole thing. Actually, it was incredible. I bought all the merch. And is about the chubby baby angels, because like, honestly, I've always had this question for a long time in like angel history, like the history of visual representations of angels, because like being somebody who's like mad in love with like somewhat earlier Christian depictions of like visual art, so like 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th century, where people are just like, they're radically free, and the things that they're doing sometimes are like going to be wild, and like it's not always clear what questions they're asking. It's not always clear like how they're like what they're unveiling about God, but like but I love it because I love how like just free this is, and then basically like it's real specific. It's like you hit about 1500 with like Raphael and Dürer, so spot on. And then from there, and then then you get suddenly all these angels are these like sometimes just baby heads with wings, just floating freaky deaky baby heads. And now talk about freaky deaky, like these things freak me out, floating freaky baby heads with these like weird pastel wings. Or there'll be like the chubby naked babies with wings, and then there's like the playful mischievous naked babies with wings, and all of this. And like by the time that you get to the 18th century, like, which 18th century, I can just say it right now, I despise the whole century. There, I did it, I said it, I'm honest. No, it's not, I do not accept 18th century. I do not accept you. And it's because like by the time you get to there's many reasons, but it's all like, like the Baroque wasn't enough, so we just like Rococo'd it, and it's just like everything is in a church, everything is guilt, everything is like pink naked babies with these pink little baby wings, and like, where is God? Like, where is God? Like, but you had it. I mean, like the thing is, like thinking about it more than like looking into artistically, like from like artistic history, what's going on, and it's what you said. Like it's not that they were trying to domesticate God per se, or like the splendor of his angels. It's just that like there's this Renaissance obsession with like the perfection of the human body, and then like. But then also we want to show this like innocence and happiness and like purity, and they're taking up on this thing that Christ says about like let the children come to me and all this stuff, and so now you represent angels as like perfect babies, and then like, but then frankly I think it just goes crazy because like baby sentimentalism, like love, like authentic, pure, beautiful love for babies, gets then mixed into like visual sentimentalism, and then you just get these like barf rococo churches with a bunch of like pudgy little naked babies with angel wings, like I cannot even tell you. I have not been there myself, but I saw a photograph of like, this is in Germany. There's of course this is in the Rococo period, of course there's like some cardinal saint, a saint who's a cardinal, who's like standing, and like where's his cardinal hat? It's a statue. He's like, where's his cardinal hat? Oh well, look up. Like on top of the altarpiece is this pudgy naked angel baby who's mischievously stolen his cardinal hat, and he's hiding in it. Oh.
Oh my God!
This is precious moments. This is 18th century precious moments.
It's precious moments, and it's also the stuff that I go, wait, am I supposed to believe that's true? Like, yeah. I don't.
Yeah,
I don't believe in
that's
that.
barf. No way.
But
barf.
but there are so many people who are, dogmatists, as you said, who are like, nope. This is what angels are. That's class 4 of the 18 class system, according to my calculations, for what angels are. And I'm like, all right, man. I just want to go, I just want to mind my own business. And
Yeah. No, I get that completely. And I have to say, like, I mean, yeah, definitely like a big, long thing, like another big part of why I was so resistant to angels and their visual depiction for a long time was definitely the putti, they're called, was these putti, because I just despise them. I think they're just visual sentimentalism, and I think that's hopeful to think too. Like, and now, maybe somebody is gonna like wow me. I hope maybe one of our listeners will wow me with some like absolutely amazing using putti to unveil something about God that only putti can unveil. Like, I would love to, believe me, I would love to see that. I can't imagine it. Maybe it's a failure of my own imagination, but like,
well, I will say, I mean, just off the cuff, you have continuously stressed, and by the way, we don't believe in the Leviathan as Catholics. I'm very clear about that. But you have continuously stressed the Leviathan in Job as an artistic device to show the bigness of God, but also the playfulness. And you have referenced the creativity and the humor of God in this podcast before. Off the cuff, perhaps a mischievous little baby angel is supposed to lead us into greater understanding of that aspect of the divine. That God isn't just the serious stone-faced Dumbledore on the ceiling, nor is he the oddly white sexy Zeus in the National Basilica, but he is the
sexy Zeus.
He's kind of mischievous, and he screws with us a little bit because he loves us, and he's playful, and he would steal the hat of the self-serious cardinal. And like, maybe there's something to that. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. So that's a possibility, I suppose. I mean, I want to think more about the idea of the mischievousness of God, and whether there's anything in the poutine, as you say.
Wait a second. The angels are actually just like French fries with gravy and cheese curds on them all along?
That's actually the icon I'm working on, is to manifest the deliciousness of God. I'm going to be painting angels as cheese curds on fries with gravy.
Praise the
Lord.
Lord.
It's pretty amazing. Yeah, I'm going to put it up in whatever parish you're based at, just right over the altar.
Just right where you have to look at it every day.
Just all the time.
Just dripping gravy.
Look, this has been a conversation that's helpful for me. I'm more comfortable talking about this and exploring this now than I was. I think your insights on the invitational component of the monstrousness of depictions of angels is really interesting, and I want to sit with it a lot more. I also want to go through some of the scriptures you've referenced and just digest some of those. But there's also like a lot more that we have to get to, and I'm looking at the clock, and we've been doing this at it for an hour and a half. I still want to get into those Renaissance super sexy human angels. I want to get into the 90s douchebag dad, you can't tell me what to do angels of Milton and Gaiman. I want to get into actually talking about like what our job as artists is in terms of like using this as a creative prompt.
Yeah.
We can easily go on for like 2 hours on this. So here's my pitch. Why don't we take what we've talked about today? Why don't we digest it? I will digest what you've said. You think a little bit more about what I'm saying, and like sort of the elf on the shelf type concerns that I have with a little guardian angel watching me and distancing me further from the old man Santa in the sky. And we'll try to come back to this for maybe an Angels Part 2. How about we do that?
Angels Part 2. We'll do it.
Tokyo Drift.
Angels Drift.
Electric Boogaloo.
I am all about this. I'm all about this.
All right. Cool, man. Well, I will talk to you next time. And in the meantime, we'd love to foster y'all's thoughts about angels, see what you've created, see what angel art you love. And so we encourage you to send us all that and to just, as always, go forth and create cool things. This has been Created Things, an art, soul, and mind production with Jacob Flores Popchak and Father Gabriel Torretta. Production by Kyle Meineke and Jessica Flores. Theme song by Federico Carranza. For more on the podcast and on its hosts, visit artsoulandmind.com.